sickest podcast. Tune in for the audio, or you can even watch back. Giving players all the props, or put them on blast. We don't give no hot takes, only talk facts.
We're giving all our devotion, riding high on this wave of emotion. Going all out, yeah, cause this is our time. No, ain't no stopping us till we reach the finish line. All in, we came in to win. We're gonna give everything. S-I-C-K on the run. S-I-C-K, sick, sick. On fire, we're ready to fight. We'll bring the house down tonight. S-I-C-K on the run. S-I-C-K, sick, sick.
Play it on the car ride, play it when you lounge. X and O, you know that we can hold it down. Shout out to my man Sammy, got it off the ground. And to all the listeners tuned in right now. Got debates, analysis, and speculation. This is sports talk for the new generation. You know where to find us, got a reputation. Sick podcast, your #1 sports destination.
Giving all our devotion, riding high on this wave of emotion. Going all out, yeah, cause this is our time. No, ain't no stopping us till we reach the finish line. All in, we came in to win. We're gonna give everything. S-I-C-K on the run. S-I-C-K, sick, sick. On fire, we're ready to fight. We'll bring the house down tonight. S-I-C-K on the run. S-I-C-K, sick, sick.
S-I-C-K, it's the sickest podcast. Tune in for the audio, or you can even watch back. Giving players all the props, or put them on blast. We don't give no hot takes, only talk back. S-I-C-K,
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 S-I-C-K.
All in, we came in to win. We're gonna give everything. S-I-C-K on the run. S-I-C-K, sick, sick.
S-I-C-K, it's the sickest podcast. Tune in for the audio, or you can even watch back. Giving players all the props, or put them on blast. We don't give no hot takes, only talk facts.
We're giving all our devotion, riding high on this wave of emotion. Going all out, yeah, cause this is our time. No, ain't no stopping us till we reach the finish line. All in, we came in to win. We're gonna give everything. S-I-C-K on the run. S-I-C-K, sick, sick. On fire, we're ready to fight. We'll bring the house down tonight. S-I-C-K on the run. S-I-C-K, sick, sick.
Play it on the car ride, play it when you lounge. X and O, you know that we can hold it down. Shout out to my man Sammy, got it off the ground. And to all the listeners tuned in right now. Got debates, analysis, and speculation. This is sports talk for the new generation. You know where to find us, got a reputation. Sick podcast, your #1 sports destination.
Giving all our devotion, riding high on this wave of emotion. Going all out, yeah, cause this is our time. No, ain't no stopping us till we reach the finish line. All in, we came in to win. We're gonna give everything. S-I-C-K on the run. S-I-C-K, sick, sick. On fire, we're ready to fight. We'll bring the house down tonight. S-I-C-K on the run. S-I-C-K, sick, sick.
S-I-C-K, it's the sickest podcast. Tune in for the audio, or you can even watch back. Giving players all the props, or put them on blast. We don't give no hot takes, only talk back. S-I-C-K,
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 S-I-C-K.
Turn up your volume. Because you're about to listen to The Sick Podcast with Tony Marinaro.
55 seconds left in the penalty, a minute and 27 seconds left in regulation time. Boston 4, Montreal 3. Lafleur coming out rather gingerly on the right side. He gives it into Lemaire, back to Lafleur.
The sickest Montreal Canadiens podcast.
You're in the ball!
Sports entertainment like no other.
Rejoint, on lui fait perdre la rondelle, une passe devant. Et c'est Canadien qui complète le dégagement et ce sera la victoire des Canadiens. Coupe Stanley pour les Canadiens. Leur 23e de l'histoire.
You found the dogs! John, you found the dogs! He found the dogs! And all together, they worked a young team to the top. And now, a 24th Stanley Cup banner will hang from the rafters of the famous Forum in Montreal. The Canadiens win the Stanley Cup.
Brought to you by Energy Transportation Group. Driven to be different. 8.6 beer. Intense by nature. And Locage. If the last time you went to Locage was when the Habs won the Cup, it's time you went back to Locage. It's gonna be sick.
Marinaro on this Monday, January 30th. It is 1 minute past 10 o'clock Eastern. I am in Montreal, and welcome to the Sick Podcast for all of you watching on YouTube Live, on Facebook Live, and on Twitter Live. The Sick Podcast brought to you in part by Energy Transportation Group. If you ship commercial freight and want to impress your boss with how much money you can save, get in touch with the logistics professionals at Energy Transportation Group. Email them at sick@shipenergy.com or visit their website at shipenergy.com. Also brought to you in part by 8.6 beer, intense by nature, the beer for those who follow their instinct and live their passions in order to make their mark. And also brought to you by Locage. If the last time you went to Locage was when Serge Savard was the general manager of the Montreal Canadiens, and they won the Stanley Cup back in 1993. Well, it's time you go back to Locage. The menu will surprise you. My guest tonight, and by the way, Eric Engels of Sportsnet and Sportsnet.ca will join us later on in the podcast. But without further ado, former Montreal Canadiens star defenseman, star player, Stanley Cup winning general manager on a couple of occasions, the Senator, member of the Big Three, Serge Savard. Bonsoir, Serge.
Hey, hi, how are you?
Ça va bien. Toi, comment ça va?
Ça va bien.
Good. Once again,
Great souvenir in your induction, by the way. I haven't heard that.
Yeah, yeah. I once again, I love the picture. Serge, if you can just tilt your tablet or your laptop so I can see a little bit more of you. There, perfect. Fantastic.
Okay. Oh, okay. It was a team 1972. That's by the way, it's the 50th anniversary.
Yes, of course it is. Of the Summit Series. And you know, it's funny.
30 years since the last Stanley Cup in Montreal, that you were some of those people that's been at Locage 30 years ago.
Yeah. And it's funny that you brought up the Summit Series in 1972, because tonight we're going to talk about the great Bobby Hull, who unfortunately was not a member of that 1972 team. And we'll talk about why in just a second. We lost Bobby Hull earlier today. He passed away at his home in Wheaton, Illinois at 84 years of age. Serge, before we talk about the great Bobby Hull, why don't we listen back to some of his great goals and some of his great highlights? Sammy and Yellow back at Master Control. Go for it.
He bumped into him. Here's right in front of the goal. Bobby Hull. Beautiful play by the Chicago Blackhawks. Ever the opportunist. And Bobby Hull gets his 37th goal of the year and his hat trick for the evening.
Toward low to Bobby Hull. Bobby trying to split around that defense. Does. And scores! Hull. Bobby trying to work into the attack zone, leaving it at the point where Nestorenko has it, spinning it behind where Mackey picks it up. He centers it. Plante is there to stop it. Tries again. Bobby Hull scores! And Bobby Hull now has 598 career goals. Bob Nevin forward. Bobby scores! And the Hawks win it! Bobby Hull in overtime! Pass to Dennis Hull, and Dennis hurries in, leaves it for Bobby. Shot, score, 600 National Hockey League goals.
The Golden Jet driving at center, in on the Ranger defense, getting set. He may pass or shoot. He drives one. And the crowd goes wild here in Chicago. Bobby Hull
Serge, Bobby Hall, once again, he was the first NHL player to score more than 50 goals in a season, surpassing his own record, and also a mark set by Maurice Rocket Richard and Bernard Jaffrion. And when all was said and done in the NHL regular season, 610 goals, 1,170 points, 3 Art Ross trophies, 2 Hart Memorial trophies, 1 Lady Byng trophy, and in the playoffs, 62 goals, 67 assists, 129 points in 119 games, and he won the Stanley Cup with the Blackhawks back in 1961. Known for his booming slap shot and his blonde hair, Serge, some people watching us right now watched Bobby Hall play, some did not. But to paint the picture, he was Chicago's version of Guy Lafleur, was he not?
At least he was, I know Bobby Hall very well. I played with him with Team Canada 76. And when I came in Montreal, I was 15 years old in 1961. And I played Junior B that year, but I belonged to the Montreal Canadiens, and they gave me a pass. I could go to all the games, standing room only, in those days. And it was in 1961, and they beat Montreal in the playoffs. And I was there, and I didn't miss that many games. And I saw him coming in the building, and he was the best hockey player in the National Hockey League at that time. He was a Gretzky, he was a Bobby Hall, a Bobby Orr, he was a Lafleur. He was, at his time, he was the best in the league. And I got to meet him a lot, and I know him very well. In 1976, we're talking about 15 years later.
Yeah.
I played with him with Team Canada 76. And I was his roommate. We stayed together, and I got to know him very, very well. Great person. And 15 years later, he was still a top player. He was still a top player.
Wow.
And he was so good for the game. Of course, in 61, and I was devastated when they beat Montreal.
Mm-hmm.
But he was the number 1 player in the league. He was a big star, and very humble star. He would stop for half an hour before he got in the building to sign all the autograph. Same thing in 76. He would sign 1,000 of autograph before a game. Sometimes people, all the players get mad at him because they had to wait 15 minutes, sometime half an hour for the bus because Bobby Hall was signing autograph in front of the bus. He was, I'm telling you, he was just as big as Gretzky at that time.
Wow. And, you talked about the 76 Canada Cup. He was born in 39. So in 76, he's 36 or 37 years old at the time. And you say he was still one of the best players in the world at that time.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. But, I hate to compare player, but I mean, the one that were the best at their time, he was the best at his time. And then Bobby Orr came, and Bobby Orr was the best at his time. Mm-hmm. And then Lafleur was the best player for 6 years. He dominated the National Hockey League, and then Gretzky dominated the National Hockey League. And there's no doubt I put Bobby Hall in the same category of those guys. He was really the best player in the league. He was a crowd pleaser. He had so many fans from all over, not only in Chicago, all over the place. He had fans in Montreal. Still, people talk to me about him, and he came in Montreal in last October. Mm-hmm. I was supposed to have lunch with him, and I had to go to the hospital with my wife, and I had to cancel that lunch, and I was supposed to get back with him the following time. that's the time he came to Montreal, and then he went to Quebec City for the 50th anniversary of the WHA, and you probably saw that. And it was a surprise to hear that he passed away this morning. I talked to him. I talked to him over the phone a couple of months ago.
Yeah, one of the privileges I have doing what I have been doing over the last 20 years, of course, is I have the great honor and privilege, Serge, to speak to legends like yourself. And I'm very, very happy that I also had a chance to meet the great Bobby Hall at one point a couple of years ago, if we can bring it up. And sometimes, I kick myself for not taking pictures with some of the greats, but I was able to get my picture with Bobby Hall. So I'm very, very grateful for that. Serge, you talked about playing with him in the 76 Canada Cup. You played against him between 1967 and 1972. You played a couple of games, I believe, in 66, but for the most part, between 67 and 72. And then he left for the WHA, which we'll get to. Very unfortunately, Serge, you didn't have a chance to square off against Bobby Hall in the 1971 Stanley Cup final, because in 1971, in January of 71, of course, you took a low hit from Bobby Baun of the Toronto Maple Leafs. You broke your leg in 5 places, which required 3 surgeries, which after doing my research, I believe it said all those surgeries came within a week. You'll correct me if that's wrong. So, but you were watching that 71 Stanley Cup final when the Montreal Canadiens, defeated the great Boston Bruins, of course, early on in the playoffs. And then they end up with an appointment with the Chicago Blackhawks. The series goes 7 games, with Game 7 decided in Chicago. The Canadiens win by a score of 3-2. Serge, everyone loves your stories. What can you tell us about watching the 71 playoffs, watching the 71 final versus Bobby Hall and the Chicago Blackhawks, and an assignment that was given to a Montreal Canadiens player or two to shadow Bobby Hall during that final? Serge, please talk to us.
Well, I was in the cast during that series, but I was in Chicago. I was there at the 7th game in Chicago, and each team had won their home games, 3 in Montreal and 3 in Chicago, and it was the 7th game, and they took a 2-0 lead in that series, and if you remember, Henri Richard scored 2 goals, and Jacques Lemaire, that's one of the most important goals. He tied the game, a slap shot from center ice.
Wow.
On the ice.
Wow.
And it took Tony Esposito by surprise. Tony didn't move.
Wow.
So I don't know if he looked somewhere else, but we thought that Lemaire would take a shot from center ice. He just crossed center ice and he took a slap shot on the ice and tied the game. And we won the cup with a goal from Henri Richard, that 2 goals that night.
Yeah.
It's I if you know Bobby Hall, you got to love him, because he was strong. He was like a bull. He wouldn't hit anybody. He wouldn't try to hurt anybody. I don't know anybody that was as fair as Bobby Hall.
Wow.
And Claude Provost shadowed him all the years in those years, and barely, he never took a penalty. He was just skating with him and shadowing him, and
wow,
he worked hard, and Hall, had a lot of respect, and I'd never seen Bobby Hall turn around and hit Claude Provost for shadowing him.
Wow.
And he's I love talent, and this is one of the best talent in National Hockey League history. And I know I don't want to take anything away from other guys. In this time, he was the best. He was something special. He was he promoted the game. He's one of those guys that promote the game. Gretzky, and when they trade Gretzky in LA, and you can say that Gretzky promoted the game. He was such of a figure, and I would rate Bobby Hall the same way.
Was he one of the first players in the history of the National Hockey League that you can remember that was actually shadowed the way he was shadowed? We know that later on, Carbonneau used to do it with Stastny, right? Those were great memories too for those who watched the Canadians in the early '80s. Guy Carbonneau used to do it with Peter Stastny, like you mentioned. Claude Provost did it to Bobby Hall. Was he one of those first players that was actually shadowed the way he was shadowed? That Claude Provost would go everywhere that Bobby Hall would go.
Oh yeah, he would. But Claude was shadowing a lot of guys. He used to shadow the best player of the other team. But he was famous in those years to shadowing Bobby Hall, and well, he still scored a few goals, and but that Claude Provost, I played with him, and one night I scored a goal in St. Louis from a pass from Claude Provost, killing a penalty, Stanley Cup Finals against the St. Louis Blues. Game we won 1-0, and Claude was the best. For we get away from Bobby Hall, but Claude was the best penalty killer in the National Hockey League. He won 9 Stanley Cup, and one year he made the first All-Star team. He scored 34 goals. He beat Gordie Howe on the right side.
Mm-hmm.
That's quite an achievement.
Wow.
And he's the only guy with 9 Stanley Cup not in the Hall of Fame.
Serge, if I read correctly, doing my research tonight, Bobby Hall had a slap shot that on one occasion was clocked in at 118 miles per hour. As big as the players are now, as strong as the players are now, maybe something escapes me, but I don't remember anyone shooting it that hard. And to think he was doing it with a wooden stick. Can you put into words when Bobby Hall would wind up to take a slap shot, the kind of slap shot he had?
No, he was he had probably the best shot I've seen. But he was not the hardest player to play against, because he was taking the puck down in his zone and was coming off on the left side, and I was playing on the right side, and I give him room. I give him a little bit of room, and then he would take a shot, pretty close to the blue line if you let him take that shot, and the goalie was just scared of him. We had Gump Worsley. I remember in those days didn't have any mask. We could have get killed with something like that, pushing somebody in front of the net, and Bobby Hall taking a shot. We didn't have any helmet.
Mm-hmm.
It was very, very, very dangerous. And I'll tell you a story. One night we're in Chicago, and Gump Worsley's in the net, and I'm telling you the truth. I'm not exaggerating it. And Bobby Hall wind up, and Gump put his glove like this, and he was out of the net. He was not in his net.
Mm-hmm.
And Bobby missed the net. And Gump used to be sick before the game when we played Chicago. That's the time of those big curve sticks.
Yeah.
And you didn't know where the puck was going. And him and Stan Mikita was the same, with those curve sticks, and it was very, very dangerous, very dangerous.
His decision to go to the WHA, so he left the National Hockey League, I believe, give or take, at around 33 years of age, to go play for Winnipeg for about 6 years in the WHA. and he left to make some money. And I think he's responsible with that move for making sure a lot of players got a lot more money at that time. Can you talk to me about that?
Well, I guess he did it for himself, and I did talk to him about that. And he says, Serge, I want to stay in Chicago. I just want a decent contract. They won't give me a decent contract. And those were the year that, we were making between $50,000 and $75,000,
Wow.
And him, they give him $1 million bonuses. It was huge. It's that the kind of money like the Live League in golf. Would give $50,000 if you come to our league, or and you're making $2 million. It's $2 million in the PGA, and we're giving you $50 million to join us in the Live League. That's about the same thing in those days, and he left for the money for sure. But without him, I doubted that the WHA would take off. And the $1 million was paid by all the other teams. And every city he went, he had to do some marketing. He had to do some signing session in those cities. And I think they give him $1 million and $250,000 a year salary. So it was huge then. It was huge.
Serge, it really is so great talking to you tonight, because it's funny. Your name came up earlier this afternoon. So I go visit my dad, and some of our great conversations, we talk about those great Canadiens teams of the 70s. So to tell you the truth, the way it started was I told my dad how much, I miss Guy Lafleur. And so we talk about the Flower for a bit. And don't get me wrong, my dad loved the Flower. I mean, who didn't? But his favorite players, for whatever reason, were Larry Robinson, Serge Savard, and Bob Gainey. All right, my dad. So he starts talking to me about the big three. And he starts telling me that back in the days of those great Canadians, Scotty Bowman would put the big three on the ice to kill penalties. And Serge Savard would keep the puck away from the opposition. Now, he tends to exaggerate a story or two. Is he telling me the truth on this one? Were the three of you on the ice for the penalty kill?
Oh, yeah, because Scotty used me as a forward.
Wow.
My first year with the Canadian, Toblik was the coach, and they were playing four defensemen. The fifth defenseman was on the bench, and you played if somebody got hurt. But I used to be a centerman when I was before my junior's day, and Toblik put his hand on my shoulder, and he sent me to kill a penalty up front with Jimmy Roberts. And I told you before earlier, I scored a goal in St. Louis with Claude Provost. I was killing the penalty with Claude Provost.
Wow.
I people don't remember, but I killed penalty maybe up front a lot, 2/3 of my career.
So was he exaggerating when he said that the big three was on the ice to kill a penalty, and sometimes other teams wouldn't touch the puck on their power play? Was he exaggerating?
Yeah. It's true.
It's true. Wow.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool.
I scored a goal 3-on-5 against Minnesota in Montreal.
Wow, that's amazing.
I was playing forward.
Serge, I think we paid a nice tribute to Bobby Hull. It's not every day I get to speak to you. If you don't mind, just a little bit of NHL talk and Montreal Canadiens talk. We're talking about great goal scorers. If I would have told you 10, 15 years ago that Alexander Ovechkin would be on the verge of breaking Wayne Gretzky's 894 goals. He has right now 812 goals. He's 83 goals away from breaking it. You would have said what?
Well, I'd say no way, like everybody else. See, Gretzky, he rewrite the NHL record book, and I never thought somebody would score as many goals. But I wonder how many goals Bobby Hall would score if he doesn't go to the WHA.
Good point. Very good point.
I'd pick all over Skin.
You would really?
Oh yeah.
So, in your opinion, even though he doesn't have the record because obviously he was in the WHA, if he would have stayed in the National Hockey League, and we'll obviously never know the answer to this, you think that Bobby Hall would have been the greatest goal scorer in NHL history?
Well, I think he would have a shot. How many goals he scored? You just mentioned it earlier.
610.
610.
Yeah, and he played 6 full seasons in the WHA, and then he played another half a season, not even, about 27 games in the National Hockey League.
So he could probably, come close to 800. Yeah, he's anyhow, I have so much respect for him, Tony, and I knew him. I know him as a fan, and then I played against him, and I played with him, and I met him many times, and had dinner with him, and talk over things, and I expressed to him how much I admire him, as a youngsters, and I was a Canadian fan, but I always admired talent.
Yeah, the 72 Summit Series. Bobby Hall didn't play.
I'll tell you why he didn't play for Canada.
Tell me.
And nobody knew that. Nobody knew that.
Okay.
I talked to Alan Eagleson last month, and Alan told Bobby Hall, "You're in, but do me one favor. Don't say anything." And Bobby Hall went to Halifax for a press conference for the WHA. And he says publicly, "I'm going to play with Team Canada 72." And he woke up Clarence Campbell, and then Clarence Campbell say, "Well, no, he's not going to play, and we're not going to allow those guys to play in the National League." And Eagleson says, if Bobby Hall don't say it publicly, he's on the team.
Wow. Isn't that something? Serge, great stories once again. I have this opportunity to talk Montreal Canadiens hockey with you. Of course, you won the Stanley Cup as a general manager with the Montreal Canadiens in 1986 and in 1993. Last year, about a year and a half ago, the Montreal Canadiens named Jeff Gordon as VP of Hockey Operations, and but a month or two later, he brought in Kent Hughes as general manager. What do you think of, the work that has been done thus far?
Well, the record is not that great now, but we've got to give them times. And I think the Montreal Canadien has a much better organization right now than they had a couple of years ago. I'm not a great fan of Bergevin, but the last year was in Montreal. The last time he was in the playoff, I think he had one player in his last 7 drafts on the team, and did a very poor job of drafting, especially in the Quebec Junior League. They didn't spend much time in there, and when I came in '83, I drafted a lot of players from the Quebec League, and it was a big advantage for the Montreal Canadiens because everybody else in the National Hockey League seen the Quebec League as inferior. I give you an example, like Claude Lemieux. I got him in the second round, and if Claude Lemieux had played for the Toronto Marlboros, he would have gone in the first round, just because he was in the Richer and Claude Lemieux and Patrick Roy in the third round. Those guys were downgrade, and the Montreal Canadiens did just overlook the Quebec League. That was a big mistake, and now I think those guys are good, hard worker, and the management is, everybody has more respect for the management right now.
Serge, if we can clear something, because some people are watching are saying, yeah, but Serge recommended Marc Bergevin to Jeff Molson, but you've come on this podcast before and you've told us that, yes, you did, but Bergevin gave you certain promises that, in your opinion, he didn't follow up on. Is that correct?
Well, I still have his presentation here. He did about the opposite of everything he said. And believe me, after a couple interview, and Jeff Molson and myself, we look at each other. We were in New York, and we went for dinner after, and we said, well, I think he's the best candidate we have, and we stopped the process at that time. I had great hopes for him, but I guess, I don't know. If I voted against him, he doesn't get the job. I'm not saying Jeff Molson has the last word, but if I'm against him, he's not getting there. And he never, one day I wrote in my book, I don't know if you read my book, and one day at the Guy Lapointe press conference when they retired his jersey, and I said, Mark, I'd like to talk to you and have a coffee with you, or breakfast or dinner. And I'd like to talk to you. He says, okay, Serge, I'm going to the draft next week in Pittsburgh, and I'll call you when I come back. And I'm still waiting for the call, and it's it really hurts me. I just want to help, and he didn't want any help. He wanted to do it his own way. He's he kept the old timers away from the dressing room, and we worked so hard, Ron Corey and myself, to bring back all the old timers, and I think the Canadian and Jeff Molson right now are trying to get back all those guys back in the group,
Serge, I know it's hypothetical, but you said something that piqued my curiosity, which was, if I don't give Mark my vote, he doesn't get the job, even though Jeff has final say. So even though it's hypothetical, if you didn't give Mark your vote, who did you have as the number 2 candidate, and who do you think it would have been then?
Well, the guy in Tampa Bay,
Julien Brisebois. Julien Brisebois.
Well, it's got a pretty good record.
Yeah.
And he was, he was second in command in Tampa Bay at that time, and he was good. Did a very good interview, and but at the end of the day, we chose Marc Bergevin, and big disappointment for me. Big disappointment.
I don't know if that presentation is years later is still is confidential or not, but I'm not going to lie to you. I'd like to see it at one point if we can have a coffee. I'll go to breakfast with you.
I'll show it to you.
I'll go to breakfast with you. And
I'll show it to you.
I'd be very happy to pick up the tab too. Okay. Marty St. Louis. Your thoughts on Marty St. Louis, a young coach, being the man in command behind the bench of a very, very young team that's learning. What can you tell us of your impressions of him?
For me, I want Stanley Cup with a rookie coach. Claude Durrell won Stanley Cup the first year as a rookie, the National Hockey League. But sometimes they lack of something. But this kid, I think he has the number one quality for a coach. I don't care if you're the best technician or if you're not the best technician, is to have the respect of your players. And to have the respect, you have to know what you're doing. You have to know what it has to make sense where you're teaching something.
Mm-hmm.
And I think this guy has that quality, has the respect of his player. You know, sometimes when things are going bad, so you hear a lot of those things. It happened every year, and it happened a lot with the Montreal Canadiens. You hear, well, he lost the room.
Yeah.
He lost the room. But this guy, I think this kid has the quality, has that quality number one. He has the respect of everybody in the room. And a lot of people, all my years I had Scotty Bowman, a lot of people didn't like Scotty Bowman. Everybody respect him. Same thing with Tobley. You know, and you need Al McNeil. Al McNeil, he won as a rookie. We had a lot of guys that won the Stanley Cup.
If I can add, same thing with Pat Burns, correct?
Yeah. But at the end, he lost the room.
Yeah, I hear you.
And he lost the room in Toronto, and he lost the room in Boston. And Pat was a guy. He was good for only a couple of years.
He had a shelf life. He was tough.
He was tough, but he was good only for a couple of years.
Yeah. Serge, you obviously were able to identify good centermen. Your teams had good centers. That trade to acquire Bobby Smith put the Canadiens over the top in 1986. Right now, because Nick Suzuki has been in a slump, mind you, a decimated team, depleted, injuries, and not a very deep team, some are starting to question whether or not he can be a number one center. Is Nick Suzuki, based on what you've seen, at a young age 23, captain of this team, is he, even though he doesn't have prototypical center size, he's below 6 feet, is he a number one centerman in your opinion? Yes or no, and why?
I think he's number one in Montreal right now. He's still young. He's you know, how many guys on the injury list in Montreal? You know,
half the team.
Half the team. So it's a lot of responsibility for a kid like that. And you say you're 22 years old, my friend, and we put the C on your jersey, and you got to carry that team. I like the kid. I like the talent. But when you go on a road trip and you have to play 6-7 games and you got 5 rookie on the blue line, I don't think you expect to have big result. And so this kid, he showed us some really good sign. It's very easy to blast a guy when you're in a little small slump, and I've seen that with many guys. Beliveau, I don't know, you may be too young, but at the early stage, Beliveau had a rough time one year, and they were saying in the paper, he's a Cadillac with the motor of a Volkswagen. They were tough on Jean Beliveau. They were tough then on Jean Beliveau. And Jean was, I was a young kid against my radio in 1953, and I listened Jean Beliveau to score 3 goals. They brought him in Montreal for 3 exhibition games. He scored 3 goals his first game in Montreal. A hat trick. And I was against my radio, and I was 8 years old. It's 7 years old in 53, and I played 4 years with him. And his last year in 71, he won the cup. I got injured that year, but he finished first scorer of the team.
Yeah. I'm going to ask you a difficult question, but you're a big man, so I know that you can handle this well. Let me ask it a different way. If Serge Savard, the great Serge Savard, was the general manager of the Montreal Canadiens, and he wanted to put together a team that would win the Stanley Cup at some point here in the next 5 years, would he be comfortable if Nick Suzuki was his number one centerman, or would he have him as a number two? That's a tough question, I know.
Who would you put as number one? I think he's number one, talent-wise.
On this team right now, yes.
Yeah, but he's no Bobby Smith, you know?
Yeah.
Bobby Smith was a first pick overall. He was the first pick overall. He was 6'4". He was tough. He had talent. And I'm not saying we won the cup because of him, but you know, you got Suzuki now, but you got so many holes on the team. It's very hard to judge the guy. But when you have a good team like we had in '86, and you had a Bobby Smith, then you had something that made our team much better. And without Bobby Smith, I don't know if we win in '86.
Kirby Dach is a big 6'3", maybe even 6'4" centerman who's a former third pick overall. He was acquired from the Chicago Blackhawks.
Yes.
We've seen him do very well on the right wing on a line with Suzuki and Caufield, and we've seen him do very well centering a line. He just has difficulty with faceoffs. Based on what you've seen, is Kirby Dach a winger or a center? Where would you play him?
I don't know. Jonathan Drouin, when he came on the team, and they tried to make him a centerman, and then a winger, and then a centerman, then a winger, and they still don't know. I don't know. I don't know. I haven't watched enough for that, but
it's a small sample size too. Yeah, it's small sample.
Yeah, he's a good kid, and why Chicago let him go if he's a third pick overall?
Maybe because for the same reasons they traded the Brinkat, because they want the number one pick overall in the draft, a kid by the name of Connor Bedard. Serge, one or two more for you if you don't mind. This is candy for everyone watching. It's absolutely fantastic. Juraj Slafkovsky. A lot of people have been talking about him this year. 18 years old, drafted first overall, rookie. The Canadiens chose to start him and keep him with the big team in the NHL until very unfortunately a couple of weeks ago, he suffered a knee injury that will see him out for the rest of the regular season.
Big mistake.
Tell me.
Well, we're all the same. As a manager, you draft a kid early and say, "Well, he looks good at camp. We got to keep him. But I think the Montreal, they made a mistake with him, but they could repair that mistake. They could have sent him to the World Junior, like Seattle did. You just send your kid. You need time. You need time. You need action. You need to play 30 minutes a game. Send him at his level, and he would have been a much better player. And by the way, we won the gold medal. But if they send him at the tournament, maybe we don't win the gold medal. But I was mad that it. Personally, I was mad. The kid, I says, don't tell me they gotta ruin this kid again. Let him play. How many? There's only a few, one or two players, one player a year that can make it at 18. In our days, nobody comes up before you finish your junior. Okay, only Bobby Orr came at 19, not at 18, 19. And we all came after our junior. Cournoyer came after his junior. And very few. Henri Richard came 1 year early. And he had a great team, and they won 5 in a row. You know, when Henry came, that's why Henry won 11.
Yeah.
But it's not true when you're 18 years old that you're ready for the National Hockey League unless you're a superstar.
Pierre, Serge, among the reasons that they kept him with the big team, I think, was they probably said as a 17-year-old, he dominated at the Olympics versus men. As an 18-year-old at the World Championships, he dominated versus some men. They probably thought, what more does he have to prove? But you would have definitely sent them to the World Juniors, and after
Yeah,
the
but
World
there's
Juniors,
no way he could have helped us. He was not going to help our team. We're not going to make the playoffs. Send him playing with the junior, and then after that, send him in Laval. You know, he has to play.
Yeah.
So we'll be behind schedule. You know, I love this management. You know, but I don't like the way they handled this young kid. You know, send him with the. You could have go to the World Junior and then send him in Laval and make sure he plays 20, 25 minutes a game. He could have developed into a better player.
Last question, and so appreciate your time once again. Cole Caufield was on the verge of probably hitting about 50 goals before he went down with an injury. I'm sure you have a lot of admiration for the way he shoots the puck and his ability to score goals. What do you think? The best
I love him. I know he's dangerous every time he's on the ice. He makes things happen. He's the best we have. He's a crowd pleaser. He comes to play, jump on his skate. I love him. I love every time he has the puck. You know, he's dangerous. He's very dangerous, and he's got a great shot. He's not a big player, so he's got to be tested a lot. But he's bulky and he's strong, and I think he'll be if Montreal gets better and has a shot at the Stanley Cup, he'll be one of the reasons. But you got to put some more player around him.
Yeah.
You know, he can score maybe 1/3 of the goal they score. So who's going to score the goal now that he's not there and Suzuki's in the slum? Who can score the goal?
You love him, and we all love you, Serge Savard. 40 years later, my dad is still talking about Serge Savard killing penalties, and the other team can't touch the puck. So you gave unbelievable memories to the Montreal Canadiens fan base as a player and as a general manager. Serge, merci beaucoup. It was so great to see you.
Don't forget today. This year was the 58th anniversary of Team of the Century.
Yes.
It's also the 30th anniversary of the 1993 Stanley Cup.
Yes.
The last cup in Montreal, also the last cup in Canada.
You're right about that. And we're not going to forget it. Thank you, Serge. You have a great night, and you take care.
Thank you, Tony.
Merci beaucoup. The great Serge Savard. Some conversations are hard to top, and I don't know about you, but that was truly a privilege. We've had him on hold for quite a while, but we just had to take in that conversation with Serge Savard. A quick shout out to Playground, over 600 machines, poker tournaments, and Playground casino games, daily promotions, and unmatched customer service. Why go anywhere else? Located just over the Mercier Bridge, only minutes from downtown Montreal. We say good evening now to Eric Engels of Sportsnet and sportsnet.ca. Eric, I think I had Agnello and Sammy tell Eric where he's probably going to join us at around 10:30. So it's closer to 10:50. So thanks for waiting, but wasn't that a treat, huh? Eric, you're muted.
Yeah, it's all good. I like listening to Serge as much as anybody. He's a guy who tells it like it is and how he sees it. And, I like people that have strong opinions and stand by them. And, he's a Montreal Canadiens legend with a move named after him and everything. So always great to hear from him. Good get.
And he loves Cole Caufield. Who doesn't, huh?
Yeah, I mean, you'd have a hard time finding people except for maybe some goalies in the league who don't like facing him.
Yeah. Listen, earlier today, if we can, and we'll talk about the National Hockey League, of course, a big trade. The Vancouver Canucks traded their captain, Bo Horvat, to the New York Islanders in exchange for Anthony Beauvillier, who's a former first-round pick, and of course Horvat was himself as well, drafted 9th overall. Atu Radi, who was a former second-round pick, I believe, 52nd overall. I saw him score his first NHL goal about a month ago. And a conditional first-round selection in this year's 2023 NHL draft, which is protected. And if it won't be, it'll go to 2024. The Canucks retained, 25% of Horvat's salary. But here's the kicker. Horvat's contract is up at the end of the year, and it doesn't look like there were talks of extending that contract. Now, a lot of people are wondering, do you expect the Islanders to take Bo Horvat and flip him?
No.
Do you expect the Vancouver Canucks to take Anthony Beauvillier and flip him?
Maybe. At 25 years old, that would make some sense. And if anything, if that was the plan for them, then you could argue it was good that they acted early. You know, my first reaction to seeing that trade is, and like, I get it, you know, like if you get what you want for a player, if you get the pieces that you were requesting and deciding to trade that player and they're available to you now over a month away from the trade deadline, then there's incentive to act and to go. You know, there's also risk of the player getting injured the longer he stays with you, and that you can't trade him if you're not going to sign him. And that's a risk that becomes a dangerous kind of line to walk as you approach the trade deadline. And you could say that for almost virtually every player that's available through trade, but it's a little harder to swallow when you're talking about the biggest piece on the market. Like we all know that if Bo Horvat was getting traded, which it became a certainty that he was when Jim Rutherford said that they offered him a contract and it wasn't enough, or, you know, what Bo Horvat would have signed for, and that bridge was basically dead. You know, at that point, he was unquestionably the biggest trade chip on the market. So to make this deal now, instead of having a bidding war that would certainly only increase as you approach the deadline, makes it hard to believe that they got the best possible deal done, unless they're planning on taking a piece like Anthony Beauvillier and turning him into an even bigger, or turning this return into an even bigger one. But I don't know. It's a little bizarre to me from a management team, a very young management team, in terms of their lifespan with the Canucks, that hasn't inspired anything that would suggest you should give them the benefit of the doubt. So it's a bit of a head scratcher for me. The one thing that you would say, just to wrap up the whole subject here, is that at least they traded the player instead of hanging on to him and losing him for nothing, because that was certainly going to happen, knowing that they weren't going to sign him. And that would have suggested, like some of their other moves, that they're completely delusional about where they're at in their status, you know?
Eric, as you know, they say the team that gets the best player in the trade is the team that wins the trade. And Bo Horvat's the best player in the trade.
Yeah, I guess so. I like, you know, back in the day, Ryan O'Reilly was traded for Tage Thompson plus, and Ryan O'Reilly was the best player in the trade, and the St. Louis Blues won the Stanley Cup. So you could say that was a really good trade for St. Louis, and it never looked like it was going to be even. And now Tage Thompson has over 32 goals and has multiple hat tricks this season, is coming to his own and has plenty of upside ahead of him.
Good point.
And there's no question who the best player in that trade is right now. So it's, I mean, you'd like to see it work out both ways. And I know the GMs who make those trades want to see them work out both ways too.
We are approaching March 3rd, so this is not the first time I've asked you this, and surely it's not going to be the last. But of course, we know that there is interest in Josh Anderson around the league. We've heard various reports that the Canadiens have turned down a first-round pick for Josh Anderson. When March 3rd comes around, is Josh Anderson still going to be a Montreal Canadien?
I really don't know. I mean, it's a really tricky question to be able to give you a yes or no answer on right now. It's all dependent on what the market would bear for a player like that. I haven't personally heard that the Canadiens turned down. I know there's rumors floating around. I haven't personally heard that they turned down a first-round pick for this player. Logically, I don't think there's a team out there that could take the player in his contract without giving up more than a first-round pick for the player. They'd have to give back something in terms of salary or contract. If Montreal was to trade the player, I'm pretty sure, based on Kent Hughes' track record, that he would not be looking to retain salary year over year on the years remaining on Anderson's contract. That would not be the objective in any deal like that. So
Yeah.
I have a hard time believing that that was necessarily the case, and maybe at one point we'll find out. But bottom line is they're not going to trade him for anything less than what they consider to be fair value for the player, because they do see him as a contributor to a team that could be successful down the road, as a player who plays fast and plays a style that is hard to find in the NHL.
Yeah.
But hey, can I see a couple teams out there having significant interest in this player, even in spite of the fact that what we see on the ice on a nightly basis doesn't necessarily fit the profile that you would expect of what he's being paid for? And I'm not taking anything away from Anderson. He plays a hard game to replicate over 82 games.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think the Canadiens are just looking to ship him out the door. Let's put it that way.
You're a collaborator on BPM Sports Radio on Martin Lemay's afternoon show. I'm a collaborator on BPM Sports Radio on Jean-Charles Lajoie's morning show, Quebec's #1 all sports radio station. And earlier today on George Larac and Max Truman's show, they were talking about 3 years from now, will Kirby Dach be the Canadiens' #1 centerman? And George's opinion was that he believes that some nights he will be, and some nights it will be Nick Suzuki. There will be no proven #1. They're basically going to take turns at being that #1. Love to have your opinion on this one. How far apart do you think they are as centermen right now? What is the biggest difference between the two? And who do you think has the biggest upside?
I mean, it's a loaded question. I'm happy you're asking it. You're not doing your job if you're not asking these questions in these types of ways. And I'm a little bit more diplomatic than some of your other people who come on and talk about these things. And I do have my own opinions. I think Nick Suzuki is a fantastic player. I think, honestly, that he's a superstar player. I think Kirby Dach is in the midst of his hottest streak of his NHL career, not just in terms of point production, just in terms of the way he looks and is, playing a dominant style of hockey, which is just unbelievable news considering for the Canadiens, considering he makes $3.3 million for the next few years after this one. So that's gravy. And I think the more important thing to suggest would be if Kirby Dach can prove to be this type of player consistently over the next little while, how much further along are the Canadiens in this process than we thought they might have been? Do you start looking at the Pierre-Luc Dubois question and saying, are you going to give up anything to trade for him, or just let him potentially walk to the Canadiens in free agency, which I think is no matter what happens with Dach, probably the best situation you could be in for the Canadiens. And if all of a sudden they have those three players, then you could debate about which one of them will be the first line center for the Canadiens. But I think Nick Suzuki is a star, if not a superstar, in this league already. And I don't really care about the fact that he's got 10 points in his last 25 games and he struggled to score a goal over his last 18. We all knew his shooting percentage was somewhat unsustainable at the beginning of the year, that he could afford to shoot more. We also know he's playing with Rem Pitlick and Josh Anderson and in front of three lines that are not even full lines, with the Canadiens playing with 11 forwards and at nights 10 for most of the game. And, calling up a player like Owen Beck as a symptom of them being so damaged up the middle right now. Dach is playing hurt, which is, if you consider what he's doing, is pretty impressive. Christian Dvorak doesn't produce much of anything. And I think we're really underestimating the loss of Jake Evans in this whole picture, because Suzuki is being saddled with a lot more defensive responsibility as a result. I just think, you put all the factors together and it's half-half, part of it is Suzuki went through a slump at the same time as basically everybody on the Canadiens went through it. And coming out of that, the entire team is injured and he lost Caufield. So, I'm not really concerned about Nick Suzuki. I think right now what's happened with him and what he's going through is the best development opportunity of his career.
Mm-hmm.
And I have no, if you're asking me to pick one player or the other right now, I'm picking Suzuki over Dach. But Dach's potential is higher than it has been since he was drafted third overall with enormous potential.
Yeah,
And that is something
the fact that he's got really, really good size, he's got a long reach. I can understand people, and he was drafted 3rd overall. I could understand people thinking that his ceiling is very high, and you know what?
His ceiling is very high.
Maybe it will be. Maybe it will be.
His ceiling is very high, and he's raised his floor. And the
Yeah.
fact that you're even asking this question, or anybody in Montreal is asking it, should eliminate the other question as to whether or not he's a winger or a center. He's a center, and he's proven it playing with players that are below grade in terms of scorers.
Yeah.
And look at what he's doing on his own. And I got to tell you, like when we spoke to Trevor Letowski about this, and I 100% agree with him. The thing that impresses me even more than the boost in production from Doc that shows that he could be a productive center is the way he plays when the Canadiens lose the puck, and like just his defensive ability, his nagging stick all over the ice. He's a very annoying player to play against, and he is really good defensively. And you hear Serge Savard talking about Bobby Smith.
Yeah.
And like we were talking in the press box about a player who kind of reminds us a bit of Bobby Smith. And maybe even with a bit more defensive edge, maybe not the same physicality, but a bit more defensive edge and a bit more edge to his game than anybody gave him credit for, which has clearly been displayed over the last little while, and not just the fight that he had against Andrew Kopp.
Oh, he's a tough boy, even when.
But let's stop talking center winger. Like, he's a center.
You know what?
Not even a question.
I got to tell you, I thought he was a centerman the minute they acquired him, and I'm glad I had that opinion, and I stuck with him. He played great hockey on the wing. Always thought he was a centerman, and right now I'm feeling good about myself too. That night when he was stood up, who was it? Was it that was it Racco Gudas that was going after everybody? I don't remember who it was right now. That game about a week ago. When was it? It was Gudas. And like he didn't back off, eh? Like
he got Gudas back for a hit that Gudas threw at him when he was in Chicago.
Yeah.
And the reason he's playing banged up right now, I'm pretty sure, is because Gudas took an intentional slap shot at his foot at the end of that game. That probably didn't feel too good. And then he tried to take out his knee.
Yeah.
Kirby right now, Canadiens fans should be really excited about the player, and I understand why it's turning into a hyperbolic discussion about him versus Nick and how he could develop. And I get it. Like, you should be excited about what Kirby Dach is showing right now, and the fact that he's doing it while he's injured and only making what he's making for the next 3 years after this one is making Kent Hughes look pretty good.
Yeah, well, one is struggling to score goals as of late and struggling to put up points. The other one's been putting up more points. So the gap has narrowed in terms of points, right? So, and the fact that once again, Kirby Dach was a former 3rd pick overall and Nick Suzuki was 13th, I understand the discussion and I can totally appreciate it. I think it makes for a pretty good debate when we probably never thought that there would be a debate around this subject.
Can I just say, I think we should stop debating the merit of whether or not Nick Suzuki is a number 1 center until he's playing with 2 line mates that are number 1 liners.
100% agree with you.
This is like, it's like going back in time with the Saku Koivu thing. Like, Saku Koivu will never be a number 1 center, and Saku Koivu was never a number 1 center. And like the best players that Saku Koivu ever played with for any sustainable period of time were like Brian Savage and Mark Recchi, who were not, necessarily in their prime when they were with the Canadiens. Yeah. And then he went and led the Olympics in scoring, playing with Yuri Lednin and Teemu Selanne. Like, let's stop talking about Nick Suzuki in this fashion when he's playing with one who absolutely is an established first-line player in Cole Caufield and is now hurt, and playing with another who was a center transplanted to the wing because the Canadiens literally didn't have anybody else who could potentially fill the promise of being a top-line right or left winger. So, like, the discussion is almost silly to me.
Eric, this is what I'd like to do in the next 7-8 minutes or so, if I can, with you, and then we'll call it a night. There are so many questions coming in on YouTube Live and Facebook Live and Twitter Live, and you know what? Usually I'm the one who asks all the questions. I don't want to do that tonight. I love to have everyone watching, all the viewers, have the opportunity to ask questions. I'm going to sit back. I'm going to watch you tackle them. Is that good with you?
Yeah, you read them to me, and I'll answer them as fast as I'm known for droning on and speaking too long, so I'll try and go rapid fire.
So we'll try and get to as many as we can. So Agnello and Sammy line them up, and it'll give me an opportunity in the meantime to talk about matrixhomefitness.ca. Discover the club quality workout in the comfort of your own home. Bring home the treadmill, or bring home the elliptical, or bring home the bike. and visit matrixhomefitness.ca. I have the Roar, which is absolutely fantastic as well. So without further ado, Sammy and Agnello at Master Control. Bring up the questions. And once again, folks, if you're loving the Sick Podcast, please hit the like button. We appreciate it. Share it with your friends. And if you're going to listen on Google, Apple, or Spotify, leave us a 5-star review. Andy says, Price is moving to Kelowna, BC. Can we flip his contract to Vancouver?
Not before the trade deadline, and maybe it'll be a discussion for the offseason and not necessarily to Vancouver, but just about anywhere. It doesn't really matter where he ends up if he ends up getting traded, because we know that he's very likely never going to play again.
That's right. Next. Is Beauvillier the guy de chez nous that we need? Corey
No, I think the guy, le gars de chez nous that the Canadians could really use is the guy who's in Winnipeg having a breakout season with on pace to score over 90 points, Pierre-Luc Dubois. And again, I think signing him in 2024 will probably be a better bet than trading for him. Especially when you consider what it might cost you. So we'll see.
Next. Louis-François Charpentier. Hey, Eric, is Mailloux a future power play quarterback, first unit?
Well, we'll find out if he can be one in Laval before we have to answer that question in Montreal. And I think, take your time with the player. He's done some good things in junior. He still has a lot of developing to do. And the main reason is not because of who he is or what he's done in the past. It's really because he missed a ton of hockey and was injured for a fair portion of, even this year. So give it time. Like, he just hasn't played a lot of hockey, and you got to develop him the right way. And if he is going to be a power play quarterback, and I think the Canadians definitely have one in Lane Hudson. We'll find out if he can do it with Laval first.
Next. 66 spinning. Tony, you think Josh Anderson? No, these questions are for Eric, okay? Do you think Josh Anderson will be traded soon before the deadline?
Well, I kind of answered it because you asked me already, Tony.
Yeah.
I think I would honestly put the probabilities here at maybe, I'd say it's a 25% chance, which is still a pretty significant chance. What would you say, Tony?
I would say we'll give it 33.3. All right. A little bit more than that, because we know that Kent Hughes and Jeff Gordon would love to have a first-round pick. They'd love to have prospects, but Josh Anderson is not one of the first guys they'd want to trade. But the challenge is that some of the first guys they want to trade don't have a lot of value in the marketplace, and I'm not so sure how many teams would like to have.
They also might not be available. Might not be available considering the injuries to Edmondson and Monahan. I would not put it higher than 25%. It's even a stretch for me to put it as high as 25%, if only for the contract. And he's the type of player that would get moved in the offseason if he got traded versus the deadline. So I think even 25% is high, but considering the interest level in the player, it's hard not to at least consider it to be a possibility that is more than just, it's probably not going to happen.
Why don't we do this? 3 or 4 more. Next. Herbert Hector. Why are they all of a sudden not playing Jack-Eye as much? Does anybody know?
Well, he's going through, I wouldn't say he's struggling, but I mean,
he struggled on Saturday night.
The Senators wasn't exactly his best one of the season. Let's see how he rebounds. But the main reason why he's not getting on the ice as much or as often is because they're playing with 7 defensemen. And, inevitably you get comfortable in certain pairs, and the guys that he pairs up with tend to play a bit less anyways, right? Like you look at Weidman, who he plays with when he's in the lineup. Or Barron for certain shifts, and now Edmondson is out, and so there's less of a veteran presence next to him. So, it's up to Jack-Eye to reply with a better game than he played on Saturday, and I think he'll be given that opportunity, and let's see what he does with it.
2 more. How about Mario Perezzino? Will Alex Burrows be back next season?
Yeah. And stop looking at Alex Burrows as the only reason the power play is not what you want it to be.
It's a legitimate question, though, Eric.
No, I get it. But the power Alex Burrows is not. Listen, let's just get this on the record here. Alex Burrows is not exclusively running the power play. It is a collaborative effort, and Martin St. Louis is very involved. But at the end of the day, this comes down less to coaching than it does to execution of the players that are in place, but also familiarity, as Martin St. Louis has talked about several times. You look at the best power plays in the world, they have familiarity. They have their players that have played together for years on end.
That's true.
And the second factor is you have scoring threats from every position, scoring and passing threats from every position. Like, look at Tampa's power play. Nikita Kucherov, I don't know what I just called him, but Nikita Kucherov or Kucherov.
Yeah, no, I think you said it well.
Anyway,
you just said it fast. That's all.
This guy can walk you down with a one-on-one move. He can set up a one-timer across the ice to Stamkos, as well as he can shoot one. And when you're a triple threat at a position and you have that at 5 different positions on the ice, that's when you become a lethal power play. The Canadiens are not even close to having that. Their best goal scorer is out of the lineup. And Alex Burrows has not been sitting there drawing up all the strategies exclusively all on his own. Like, it's this guy takes a disproportionate amount of abuse for the Canadiens power play. And really, when it comes down to it, Kirk Muller famously said, "Show me good players, I'll show you good power play."
Yeah.
And to add to it, what Martin St. Louis says about show me players who have played together for a long time, I'll show you a good one. Those two factors are the biggest factor in power play being good.
And we talked about it before. I mean, lack of a quarterback on a power play, that's a significant piece, we have to say. I mean, the Canadiens don't have that big shot from the point right now the way they have had in the past, like whether it was a Marc-Andre Bergeron, whether it was a Sheldon Surrey, or even going back to the 80s and Gaston Gingras. I love Gaston.
Even the two guys that they had, like, if you look at Mike Matheson, right? Like, he could be good in that position, but he's missing the familiarity factor. He hasn't played with these players for a long, and he's been hurt for a large portion of this season. So he doesn't have the familiarity with even the Suzukis and the Caufields, let alone, what you would need to operate a power play as a quarterback. And Justin Barron has barely gotten the repetitions there and has the potential to be that guy. Somebody asked about Logan Mailloux before. Justin Barron is a good power play player and could be that guy if he gets familiar with the weapons that the Canadiens have and are going to have in years to come.
Yeah, and they don't have a Shea Weber, and prior to him, they used to have a PK Subban, and they don't have him either. All right, I got bad news for you. You're very, very popular, man. Like, I've been told we have 87 questions. I'm kidding. 1 or 2 more, okay?
Go with 3 or 4 more, and then we wrap it.
So 3 more, okay? 3 more. Here's number 1. Does Eric expect a busy 2023 trade deadline? Yes or no, and why?
I don't know. You got to be more specific. Are we talking in Montreal? Are we talking in the NHL in general? I think we're talking about Montreal.
Let's go with the Habs.
Let's find out what the status is for Joel Edmondson and Sean Monahan before answering. And I don't want to sit here speculating and saying they're both off the market because neither of them will be back before. We don't know. Until we get an actual update with some sort of valid information to it, can't really say for sure. It obviously doesn't look good that we don't have an answer to those questions right now. So let's see. We're expecting to hear something about Monahan before the end of the week. That we don't have anything yet is certainly reason for people to speculate and be concerned. And the Canadiens are willing to live with that speculation because they don't want to divulge the information. What I would say is the fact that they haven't said anything and aren't providing an update could actually be seen as a sign that Monahan, there's still a good chance he'll be back before the deadline. And so they don't want to divulge what's going on with him. Because if he was done, we'd know by now. So we'll see what happens. Maybe they're looking at further testing to check the severity of his injury. Maybe they want to take precaution and they're just holding him out longer so that they can reactivate him when they need to and bring him back. Or maybe he's really too hurt to keep going and it's not just the foot and it's something else. And who knows? That unfortunately, we're left with all that speculation and it sucks for Sean and it sucks for the Canadiens. It sucks for their fans. But if Monahan and Edmondson are not available for trade, it could end up being a lot quieter than the Canadiens and Kent Hughes were hoping it would be come March 3rd.
My God, I just read a question, someone asking if we think Carey Price is going to play a game between now and the end of the year. Folks, it's over, folks. It's over. Here's question number 2. I told Eric 3, so here's number 2. Anthony in Montreal, will the Habs clean house as far as the coaching staff is concerned this offseason, minus St. Louis, minus Marty St. Louis, of course?
No.
I think Eric answered that when he said
one answer.
Yeah.
No, and I'm pretty sure. Let me see. 1, 2, 3. They all have at least 1 year left under contract.
Yes. And they're rebuilding, folks. So the way they're growing with their players, they're going to grow with their coaches. Last one.
By the way, I don't have a problem with their coaches. I don't know.
Well, you know,
I don't know what people expect this year.
Well, that's exactly what I'm
14
getting into.
regular players that weren't at practice today.
Yeah, but you know, you can talk about,
and they weren't supposed to be good with those guys healthy.
Eric, you can talk about if the Canadiens were on paper a Stanley Cup contender, if those are the coaches or that's the staff that can get you there. That's a legitimate debate. But to question the coaches in a season that is a rebuilding year where they're not going to make the playoffs, where half the team is injured right now, people I think are barking up the wrong tree. Andy Zaff, last one for you, Eric. Do you think it's possible that Carey Price will retire and the Canadiens will hire him and pay him as a team ambassador for what he may be owed over a period of 5 to 10 years? No. Sorry, I answered that one for you, but it doesn't work that way.
I get the question, Andy, but no.
It doesn't work that way. You know, Carey Price got hurt on the job and he'll be paid by the Montreal Canadiens, company that, or the insurance company that they use.
Also say he's also is acting as a team ambassador right now.
Yes.
Participating in some off-ice events and meeting different people in the community. And I suppose that's the least he could do for the money he's getting paid.
Eric, once again, thanks for your patience because I kept you waiting while I was talking to the Senator, Serge Savard, which was a treat. And so are you every week, usually a regular contributor on Mondays, unless the Canadiens play. Thanks for joining us a little bit later tonight. I thought it was important that, of course, somebody talk about Bobby Hull's career. And obviously, Serge Savard knows him well, played against them between 1967 and 1972. And he was his roommate the 1976 Canada Cup. Thanks, Eric. Have a great night.
Pleasure, Tony. Take care.
All right. And special thanks to the Senator, member of the Big Three, Le Grand Serge Savard. Merci, Serge. And merci to all of you. Thank you. Grazie. We'll be back tomorrow. Same time, same place, right after the Canadiens and the Senators. Tell your friends about this podcast. If you're wondering why I decided to go forward with it, because tonight, as you saw, this podcast is pretty sick. I'm Marinaro.
And that's a wrap. Hope you don't miss us too much until next time. Follow the Sick Podcast with Tony Marinaro on YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, Google Play, and Apple Podcasts. The Sick Podcast is brought to you by Energy Transportation Group, driven to be different, 8.6, intense by nature, and La Cage. If the last time you went to La Cage was when the Habs won the Cup, it's time you went back to La Cage. The menu will surprise you.